Welcome to Accreditation Conversations. I'm your host, Amy Dyens with Weave Education, and today I have the pleasure of speaking with someone who really doesn't need an introduction in this space, Linda Suskie. Linda has spent almost 40 years in higher education. I'm certain many of you have already been positively impacted by the work that she's done, both through her writings as well as through her consulting practice on campuses. Today, Linda is going to speak with us quite a bit about the need for us to spend time and resources on faculty professional development. Specifically, she speaks passionately on the topic of student learning and how research-based practices can inform faculty practices in the classroom and ultimately lead to greater student success. Before Linda was a consultant on campus, she was in your shoes. She came from a campus where she was an assessment director and involved in accreditation. And then from there, she was a vice president in Middle States and, of course, spent many years in that role where she was assisting institutions through the process of accreditation. Today, you'll have the opportunity to learn from her directly and to hear a bit of her vision about the future of accreditation and learning on campus. Welcome to Accreditation Conversations. I'm your host, Amy Dyens of Weave, and I'm pleased to be joined by Linda Suskie today. As a new assessment director on campus, I bought her book, and I was hooked immediately by her no-nonsense approach to the work. I have so much respect for the impact she has had on higher education's thinking about assessment and the role of accreditation in driving educational quality. Thank you for joining me today, Linda.
Delighted to be here, Amy.
Yeah. When I asked you recently about the future of assessment and accreditation, you shared some strong opinions about teaching and learning and accreditation standards with me. Can you tell our audience a little bit about those future standards that you were suggesting?
And to be really succinct, I don't think most accreditation standards really focus enough on teaching and learning, and that's what accreditation is all about. Accreditors don't accredit a research institute. They accredit schools, colleges, universities, educational institutions, and the aspect they accredit is the teaching and learning that goes on. And there are certainly a lot of standards that address it, but two things that I have this fantasy that if I was in charge of all accreditors, I would want to do. The first one is I'd like to see a really explicit requirement that faculty use research-informed methods to help students learn. We're coming off of a good quarter century of really good research on how to help students learn and succeed. And I just find that a lot of faculty and administrators are just unaware of those strategies. So I'd like to see everybody aware of it and then trying to implement it. So related to that, I'd like to see institutions be expected to provide adequate support to help faculty learn about those research-informed teaching methods and apply them to their own courses and programs. I'd like to see an expectation that faculty use not just research-informed methods, but use their own systematic evidence to inform improvements in their teaching. There's usually a generic statement that assessment results are used to improve student learning, but it's not necessarily the expectation that faculty, that becomes a habit with all faculty, that not just the big fancy assessment stuff you collect for the accreditor, but each time anybody gives a test or an assignment, do a systematic reflection on, a lot of students got question 12 wrong. Why? Really investigate that and think, well, the next time I teach this, what am I going to do differently so students do better on question 12? That kind of an expectation that hasn't permeated down. I've got one other fantasy about accreditation. There's all course syllabi that I've seen include a list of the objectives of the course. I'd like to see that expanded into a chart where for each objective it says what's the program outcome or gen ed outcome or institutional learning outcome that this course objective will help you achieve? Most of them should have a connection, not all of them, but many of them should. And I'd like to see that. And boy, that would really help curriculum mapping. And that would also help students see, oh, this is why I'm, focusing on this in this course. This is how it will help me throughout the program or whatever. Then I'd like to see a third column that says, this is the learning activity that will help you achieve this objective. So students no longer wonder, gee, why is she making me write this stupid paper? Oh, this is what I'm supposed to learn from it. And then the fourth column would be, this is why this is how I'm going to grade you on it. This is what you're going to submit to me, whether it's a test or an assignment or a group project, but this is how you'll be graded on it. And that would make sure that the grading process really, really focuses on key course objectives and tangentially also on program learning outcomes. Just sync everything together really, really well.
I am just in love with this. So much of this is attractive to me as somebody who was faculty on campus, who came from a business background where I had an MBA and I end up teaching, right? And I have no background whatsoever in education.
Yeah, and most of us don't. I have faculty all the time that say, you don't understand. I'm an engineer, yes, I'm teaching engineering, but I'm not a trained teacher. Or I'm an artist. I'm not a trained teacher, or I'm a musician, or I'm a historian. None of us, except those teaching in the College of Education are trained teachers. And so we all need that. I was glancing to the side because I've got my bookcase over here, and I wanted to give credit to Dee Fink, who has written wonderful books on course curriculum design. And this idea for a 3 or 4 column chart, he also came up with the same idea before I did. So I always want to give credit to him for the idea. I add the idea of the fourth column, which is inserting what is the program or gen ed or institutional learning outcome that the objective is related to. But he's been a big advocate of a 3 column chart. And it's just, it really gets everybody focused on teaching and learning what's most important. So in my dreams, I would love to see that as required.
I never thought I would have the opportunity to have a conversation with Linda Suskie and hear what your fantasy is for higher education.
Not very exciting, I'm afraid.
No, it is, but that's one of the things that I love about these conversations is that I'm having the opportunity to speak to folks that are like-minded, right? Like, it's like, yes, like we're really engaged in higher education and learning and care tremendously about students getting value out of what they're doing when they're on campus, whether or in, online learning programs. It seems almost even more important in those environments where you're being very intentional about what is it that you expect students to be able to take away from this course, and how are you going to know if they did? And so, yeah, this is wonderful. You said something early on that I want to explore just a little bit further, because I think it would be easy for folks to miss, and that is this idea that all of these things that we're talking about in faculty intentionally designing a course related to outcomes and, ways to structure that so that the syllabi is clear to the student. You're actually suggesting that is something that the accreditors should be requiring of higher education institutions. Is that correct?
And understand that, it's all about teaching and learning. All the standards are related in one way or another to making sure students get a really good education. But I think 2 things that could be more explicit is purposefully, ideally through that 4 column chart, but in some way, really making sure that course curricula are designed to help students achieve key outcomes. And the great thing about putting it on the syllabus is then the students know about it. And one of the things we know through research is if students understand why you're making them do this assignment, it becomes much more meaningful for them. And a lot of them will put more effort if they realize what they're supposed to get out of it. So it's kind of win-win all around. But the whole idea of being aware of scholarship out there on how to help students learn and succeed, and making sure that it's applied appropriately to whatever's being taught or how students are being helped to learn and succeed. That's where many accreditors are not yet at that point, and I'd really like to see that.
Mm.
Basically, what I'm getting at, and I know this is a hyperbole, but I'd like to make a dramatic statement to get people's attention. We now know that lectures are the worst way for students to learn. I think too many faculty don't know that yet
Mm.
and don't know what the other options are. And in a nutshell, that's what I'd like to see the entire education community make a much more concerted effort on, and accreditors could help push everybody in that direction.
Excellent. And so it also makes me think of some things that you've expressed and some things from my own experience where, so I'm that person on campus who maybe has a lot of experience. I'm an engineer, I'm a business person who, you're an expert in your discipline. But now I'm also an instructor and I don't have this background. It sounds like you're also advocating for this to be something that the institution as a whole needs to take some ownership of. So not that it's on the faculty themselves
Right.
individually, like, oh, why aren't you a better instructor? But rather
Mm-hmm.
like, how do we support you in becoming a better instructor, a better teacher, and making sure that you are aware of good teaching practices and the research and things like that. Are you
Can
seeing
I
that
share with you?
happen? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to share with you a story, and this is about 10 or 12 years ago, but I still think it really, really stayed with me. I've been providing professional development for colleges and universities for about 25 years now. Um, this is ancient history, but if you remember what we call the Great Recession of about 12 years ago, 2009, um, calls for me to do professional development really dropped because a lot of colleges, because there was so much uncertainty, even if they were funded right then, they didn't know what the next year would be like. And anything that wasn't essential was cut. And that included, in most cases, professional development for faculty. I was invited to a community college in Illinois. And I said to them, wow, given all the financial uncertainties, I'm really impressed that you still invited me to come. And they looked at me really surprised. And they said, Linda, teaching is what we do. Cutting professional development for faculty on how to teach is the last thing we would cut from our budgets. And the sad part is most colleges wouldn't say that.
Mm-hmm.
But if every college would do that, and that's, if you're going to do those things that I'd like to see, it requires an institutional investment in professional development, and not just saying, well, we're going to offer a bunch of workshops and having, like a committee or somebody say, well, I think we should do this. No, get into this habit of using evidence to inform everything. Do a needs assessment of your faculty, not only with what they need to learn, but what's the best way for them to learn it. A webinar or workshop may not be right. The people that most need help may not show up to something like that. Maybe one-on-one mentoring or small group mentoring or going into individual departments,
Mm-hmm.
that may be more effective. But I, yeah, I don't know if it needs to be an accreditation standard, but investing in meaningful, appropriate, relevant professional development for faculty, I think, is essential.
Yeah. Excellent. And I think that because faculty really, honestly, they are stretched. And in my experience, they truly care about their students, right? I
Yes.
very rarely have encountered a faculty who didn't truly care about their students, but it's a matter of being able to do all the things. And so if you don't really make that a part of the expectation and the role, and then give folks a safe space to struggle and learn as an organization, I mean, we can't expect it to really be cultural, like you said, to become a
Right.
habit if it's not something you're intentionally doing and leading the organization in that direction with structure and resources and all of those things.
It
So,
means a bunch of,
nope, go ahead.
I was going to say, it means having a whole bunch of carrots and sticks,
Mm,
to really encourage and facilitate and make possible, because yes, faculty are so overwhelmed these days. Every year they've got more and more loaded on this plate, and the pandemic has only taken
mm,
previous overloads and ramped it up to a whole new level. Um, they really need help setting priorities, and I Universities can do that by, I mean, there's a whole package of things that they can do. One thing is, if teaching truly effectively is that important and you want faculty to focus on that, something else has to come off their plate.
Hmm.
What else are they doing that's not quite as important as that? And tell them, put that on a back burner. You mentioned giving, let me rephrase what you said a little more clearly. I've heard of some institutions that when faculty want to take time to move from a lecture focused course to
Hmm.
a more interactive, experiential type learning experience, that takes trial and error. The first time I did that many years ago, my class, it was a disaster. But some institutions are willing to give faculty members a semester or a year of grace from their faculty evals.
Hmm.
Let them work out the kinks and then restate the evaluation process. And while we're on the faculty evaluation process, most faculty evaluation processes say they look at teaching effectiveness, often evaluated through those teaching evals that get filled out at the end of the semester. I like to define teaching effectiveness as somebody who is always using systematic evidence to understand and improve their teaching.
Hmm.
Somebody said to me about 20 years ago that a great teacher is always improving. That's the definition of a great teacher. Is that what is acknowledged in promotion and tenure guidelines?
Hmm.
Is that what's really focused on? Efforts to look at that systematic evidence and use it to always try to improve your teaching and not be satisfied with the status quo, no matter how good your student evals are.
Oh, excellent. I have had the opportunity to talk to a few academic deans because I came from that area of administration.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting when you talk about faculty evaluations. And I'm thinking of somebody in particular who shared a story with me that was about a faculty who, as students matured in their learning, very much appreciated the his style and the way that he pushed them, right? So as a senior, his evaluations are spectacular, right? As a freshman, his freshmen didn't know what to do with him, right? Like
Yeah.
he would never answer a question directly, right? It was always
Mm-hmm.
kind of pushing them to seek the knowledge themselves. He was always like kind of challenging them in ways that they hadn't been used to previously, right? And so, like, looking at those differences, it was like, we all knew, in the end, that this is a spectacular teacher, right? He's doing a great job. But freshman faculty evaluations, they were not something that reflected the fact that we knew he was doing a great job for his students, right? Students don't know, right? Especially freshmen, right?
Yeah. And that's if somebody's uh, uh, if somebody loves to teach like that professor clearly did, they could use some professional development. For example, when I've taught
Mm,
first year students, um, especially if you're at a school with a lot of underprepared students,
mm,
they come to college and they may never have been actually taught to think for themselves, to think critically and
mm,
analytically. And when you ask them to come up with ideas or arguments, they don't know where to get started. And I found one of the answers is I did a lot of small group work. I would take the class right there and break them into groups and have each group brainstorm ideas. And that got them in the habit of talking about it. They were much more comfortable talking about it with fellow
mm,
students than with me. And then the group simply reported out the ideas they came up with. And that got them in the habit of thinking. And I bet that professor, share that tip, and I think that might make a big difference with that class. But it all comes down to
mhm.
really having meaningful, evidence-based professional development that meets the faculty where they are.
Excellent. And so you're actually bringing us to, we've talked about at a high level some, insights into what you might do at an institution if you really want
Yeah.
to embrace this thinking. Can you be a little more specific for folks? So if I am thinking about preparing for a future accreditation standard, that fantasy accreditation standard that is going
Yeah.
to be related to using research-based teaching and learning practices on campus, what would you advise folks to do at their institutions to begin preparing now?
I'll just repeat what I've already said, really invest in faculty professional development. Not necessarily a lot of dollars. I know a lot of colleges are really small, really on a shoestring. For schools like that, it might be fine to give one faculty member who's really interested in this some release time and create like a team of mentors who would be willing to do mentors, maybe lead some workshops, brown bag lunch discussions, come over and meet with the department, go through their syllabi or their tests with them, things like that. I'm a big believer that many hands make light work, but really be much more purposeful about professional development. Again, don't just have somebody sit and say, well, I'd like to offer some workshops on A, B, and C this year. Really use evidence to inform it, and have somebody out there who's coordinating it all and making sure it happens.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I know that there are many folks on campus that your message will resonate with, and having some actionable steps is always helpful. So we're going to change a little bit of our concentration here in our conversation. And I'm going to ask you a big question about the higher education landscape in general. And so higher education has made a huge difference for me personally. I was a first generation college student, and really I was transformed by the experiences that I had at universities. But despite my personal experience, it's easy to observe in the market today that we're still seeing dissatisfaction from key stakeholders like parents and students. And that breaks my heart, right? I would really like to see us tackle that and not hide from it as higher education professionals. And so I would like to hear from you a little bit. What are you seeing out there? What are your thoughts on this dissatisfaction and this theme that we're seeing in higher education, as well as some of the things that you might advise folks to do to mitigate that and to prepare for these students that are coming to them, that we want them to leave ecstatically happy with what they received as a part of their university experience. So I'll turn that over to you for a moment.
I'll be even more dramatic than you. It's not just people expressing dissatisfaction with higher ed. We've got people in this country who think higher ed is evil, that it's the enemy. Really, really scares me. I love this country. And that's why I'm in this business. It's funny. We're supposed to be talking about accreditation and assessment, and we're really talking about teaching and learning. That's what it's all about. People who know me know that my passion is, I really think we need to get everybody the best possible education. And once you go to college, one of the great things about it is you learn to think. You learn to think analytically. You learn to evaluate evidence. You learn to sift through evidence, separate what I like to call the credible evidence from the incredible evidence. Those are all skills that this country and this planet really, really needs if we're to get out of all the various messes that we're in. But at the same time, students today are going to college for different reasons than when you and I went to college. Back then, if you could afford it, you went to college just because you love to learn, and it's a chance to learn about all these cool things. I know when I went to college, one of the things I loved was I got teased as a child for using big words. I went to college and I could use big words and nobody teased me about it. I mean, I felt, I was with my peeps. It was just great. And you still have some students today going to college for that reason, but more and more college has become a requirement for a decent paying job. You're if you have a high school education, your opportunities to make a decent living are very limited. If you get a college education, you have a lot more opportunities. So today, most students at most colleges are going not to learn think deep thoughts and learn about all these things that I loved studying. They simply are there to make more money. And they're and also college is a lot more expensive. The
Mm.
cost of tuition and fees has grown much more than the rate of inflation over the last few decades. So it's taking a much bigger chunk out of their wallets and their families' wallets than when we went to college. It's leaving a lot more of them in debt. They really want cost benefit. And so
Mm.
every course they're taking, they get really critical if they have to sit through a course and say, I don't know why I have to take this except it's required. This has
Oh.
nothing to do with what I'm interested in, nothing to do with what I'm going to do. Now, if it's a program that leads to a specific career, if they want to be an accountant or they want to be a nurse and they're in accounting or nursing, most of that they'll say there'll probably be some units where they say, why do I have to learn this? But most of it will make sense. I think that the big challenge with us is gen ed and liberal arts majors, which
Mm.
I'm a huge passionate fan of because that's where you learn how to think, and you learn how to think from the perspective of many different disciplines. So you become more agile and flexible. And most of us do not retire from the same job that we started at. We need
Mm.
that flexibility for continued success. So, and also there's the business of being a good citizen and, contributing to your community. Liberal arts and gen ed help you do that. We are not getting that message out.
Mm.
I know that AACNU in particular, Association of American Colleges and University, has taken this on. They have wonderful resources, but again, a lot of faculty, a lot of administrators are just oblivious to it. So we need to figure that out. But in the meanwhile, what I think we also need to do is spend a lot more time listening.
Mm.
Um, I listening to students about why are they going to college, what do they want to get out of it. You mentioned students, parents. I would also add employers to that. We have
Mm.
employers that say, yeah, that student has a degree, but I still have to teach them how to write or things that are, quantitative skills, whatever. Um, if you, I think almost any program would do well to have some kind of an employer advisory board,
Mm.
maybe an alumni advisory board of recent graduates. You can find them on LinkedIn. I mean, I'm sure your alumni data, office has a database, but if you just search through something like LinkedIn for recent graduates, that's often another good way to get in touch with them. I'd like to see them get involved partnering with us. For instance, I'd like to see recent graduates and employers see drafts of things like program learning outcomes, gen ed
Mm.
learning outcomes, institutional learning outcomes, and say, what do you think? Are these the things you think you really you need in employees or that you need as an employee? Rubrics, not every rubric, but the one for a big capstone or signature experience.
Mm.
Are we looking at the right things when we're evaluating student performance? Is this what you've needed as an employee, or is this what you're looking for as an employer? So a lot more partnership and a lot more listening, I think, would make a really big difference.
Excellent. It's amazing how many problems can be solved by listening.
Yeah.
I love that. Thank you so much for offering some very concrete things that folks can do. And that is what I've always appreciated about your approach to assessment, to accreditation. It's practical things that we can do. It's
Yeah.
very actionable. And instead of feeling this like the overwhelming, it's a big problem. What do we do?
Yeah.
There's so much. If we can just take some steps in some of these ways, I think folks will be amazed at the progress, right? Just do something. And like you said, like keep learning along the way. It's not going to be perfect the first time, but
Right.
create that space.
Right.
The first time you have an employer advisory board, it might be a little intimidating. It might be a little,
Mhm.
interesting. What you hear from employers may not be what you expected, right? But to be open to that and learn and incorporate that into your
Yeah.
program can only benefit your students. So,
And by the way, when I mentioned that, obviously an employer advisory board would be great for career programs, but I think liberal arts. If you have a history program, those students are going out and doing something. Find
mhm.
out where they're going. What are the? There's probably a few employers that are most likely to hire them. What are their? Okay, so they may not all be historians. What are they doing? How are they using what you've learned? Um, So the same approach, just find out who are some fairly frequent employers of your grads, even if you are in a liberal arts program, and then link what you're teaching in the liberal arts to what students are doing in their careers and what employers are looking for.
And learn to articulate that so that everybody can really be on the same page. Seems, which
I'm glad you mentioned that, because as you were introducing this question, I was thinking, um, we do put ourselves in an ivory tower. I talked about how when I first went to college, it was nice that I could continue to use big words. And that's great when we're all talking among ourselves. One of the things that I've loved about having a career in higher ed is everybody uses big words. I can continue to use big words. But when you get out with people outside higher ed, um, it's so important to speak really, really clearly in simple terms. I'm not talking about dumbing things down, but we use a lot of jargon that puts up big walls in the conversation. I think a good way to think of it is imagine that you're always communicating to an entering college student, a first semester, first year student. They're not going to know the vocabulary and the jargon yet. So how can you explain, your learning outcomes, your rubric, your syllabus in terms that first semester, first year student will be able to understand? And yeah, I've learned a lot in the last few years about communication, and people really resonate to things being presented in very, very simple terms. And even for us who use big words and complicated sentences, short and sweet gets the message out there. None of us has the time to digest something lengthy and complicated. So being really, really simple and communicating with everyone, we're all so busy and overwhelmed that it helps everybody.
excellent. You're making me think about conversations I've had with designers, and it's almost like you're applying design thinking there, right? It's
Yes.
way easier to do the complicated thing, right? It's the
Mm-hmm.
beauty and the simplicity that makes it something that everybody can adopt and share with others. So, I
Yeah.
mean, I love that. I've had a wonderful morning talking to you, Linda. I really appreciate that you're taking the time to share with all of us. I think that you've shared some very actionable things that folks can take away from this conversation and right away start to make a difference. So thank you for that. Um, I'm going to ask you if there's anything you're reading today, right? So I'm a bookworm.
Mhm.
I have a bookcase right there that I collect all kinds of reading materials. And so I'm sure some of the folks out there listening are also bookworms like us. And so what are you reading today? What would you recommend folks pick up if they're looking for something to read over the holidays?
Um, I've lucked out because I have an advanced copy of a book that's not coming out until
Ooh,
2022. But
excellent.
I'll give it a plug right now. It will be published next year by Stylus in 2022. It's called Reframing Assessment to Center Equity.
Mhm.
And it's one of those books that's a collection of essays written by a lot of different people, which I really like because then for one book, you get a whole bunch of perspectives. Um, I I've been working in higher ed for about 40 years, and higher ed has always worked on issues of equity. But I think a lot of us got woke in the last year on how much we still have to do. And the book will be a grab bag of very practical ideas and experiences and ideas that I think will be very useful in informing conversations on campus. On assessment, but I think, then bringing assessment into the equity conversation and vice versa. So I'm really excited about that. Um, there's one other book. I haven't opened it recently, but it was one of those mind-blowing books that really changed my thinking. It's called How to Measure Anything. I love simple titles, by Douglas Hubbard, published in 2014 by Wiley. It was written for the business community. And I know some people are going to say, wait a minute, we're not a business, but it turned out that in the world of business, they are dealing with a lot of the same struggles that we deal with assessing student learning and student success. In fact, the subtitle of the book is Finding the Value of Intangibles. And by that, they mean things that you can't measure with dollars and cents and, produce a number of widgets produced and things like that. So the kind of things they're thinking about are very much like what we deal with in higher ed. The book really affected my thinking on assessment. And I'll give you one example. One of the things he said is, don't aim for perfect assessments, which is, again, we're in higher ed, we're all well educated. Many of us have been to grad school. We know how to do scholarship. We want to get, we know how to want to get this perfect. His point there is that we are already making decisions every day about things like teaching and learning and how to use our scarce resources. We're using them, we're making those decisions often with no evidence to inform them, no information, or sometimes really poor quality information. The whole idea of this assessment stuff is to just get us better evidence that helps us make better decisions, not perfect decisions. And, when you think about that, huge weight off the shoulders. And I can tell you that's most accreditors, that's their expectation. Not that you have perfect data, but that it's good enough quality that it helps you make better decisions than you're making right now. Really, really, and that's just one example of the cool insights I got out of this book.
Excellent. I love both of your recommendations, and I can't wait to read them. And I have actually not heard that one, and so I'm looking forward to it. So, Linda, is there anything that I haven't asked you about today that you really wanted to share with our audience?
We've covered the big points. Really my passion here is not assessment and accreditation, but helping students get a really great education. One of the things that I worry about is that we spend more time and more money working on assessment and accreditation than we do on improving teaching and learning. And, our priorities are completely backwards. I think that the general tip that I would give people is if you really, truly focus everybody on making sure every student gets the best possible education, you'll be fine.
Yeah. Excellent. That insight is spectacular. It's unfortunate that it's true, but you are exactly right. Accreditation will take care of itself if you're doing these other things well.
Yeah, I mean, that's what accreditation is about. We want to make sure every student gets a great education. So if you really, really, truly work on that, using systematic evidence, helping faculty, really, really working on not just being happy with the status quo, but really trying to get it better. That's all accreditors are looking for.
Excellent. Thank you so much for joining me today. If anybody wanted to get in contact with you, connect with you after the podcast, how should they do that?
The easiest way is to go, I have a website, lindasuskie.com. It's got a blog in it. I suspended it at the beginning of the pandemic. But I still think, even though most of the posts are a few years old, I think most of them are pretty relevant and it's worth browsing through them. It has my contact information in it. I'm also on LinkedIn and on Twitter, so you can always get messages to me those ways too.
Excellent. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for inviting me, Amy. This was fun.
Excellent. It was a wonderful conversation with Linda today. I enjoy spending time with her so much. She has so much experience and wonderful insights. She's also really passionate about higher education and the impact it can have on students. I enjoyed listening to her talk about what she envisions as the next phase of improvement in quality on campus, and how much it was really focused around professional development for faculty, really assisting faculty in success when they're attempting to learn and to do that struggle that it takes sometimes to improve your teaching and to improve the courses that you provide to students. And I hope that many of you out there listening will spend some quality time on your own campus having conversations about how can you further support faculty, what kinds of professional development are you able to provide to them and to make it a priority, really. As she said along the way, if you take care of those things and really pay attention to the teaching and learning processes that are happening at your institution, accreditation will take care of itself. It really will, because you'll have an abundance of evidence that you can provide showing how well you're not only serving your students currently, but also the efforts that you're taking to improve what you do for them. We are also very pleased to have Linda teaching some of the Weave Academy courses. She has a couple of workshops that she's offering in 2022, and as well as having participated in panels for us. And so if you'd like to learn more about that, you can go to weaveeducation.com and click on the Weave Knowledge Center. Thank you so much for listening. Till the next time.